So firstly, welcome everyone and thanks for joining. This is a webinar on understanding the energy bill. It will be recorded as well, so we will be sharing this after. Just to begin with, a couple of house rules. If there are any questions, you will have the Q&A function, but we're also going to open up the last sort of 20 minutes of the webinar to open questions where we can answer them live as well. In the short term, though, you should have a Q&A option just at the top of your screen. So if you want to fire any questions across during the event, I can sort of pick some of them up towards the end of the webinar as well. So my name's Josh Robinson. I'm Assistant Director and I also head up our UCM team, that's Utility Contract Management. So I have direct relationships with about 35 energy suppliers, as well as the DNOs, district network operators, like the National Grid, and we look at a range of different things. Webinar today will focus around understanding the energy bill. What we'll be doing is looking at breaking down the energy bill, some of the key myths, some practical tips in also helping you to manage your costs and making sure you can keep those bills as low as possible. So just to head into the webinar itself, we'll go through sort of a bit of an agenda first, just looking at some of the key items that we do want to cover and what we want to get out of this. So first one, current news. You've probably all seen news last sort of week. The impact on price is immediate and also some of the longer term impacts as well. We do want to sort of assess why energy bills can be so confusing. We want to look at the key sections within an energy bill. And then we also want to focus on changes that are on the horizon. What does the future look like? How will your bills be changing in the months and years ahead? Like I said, we do want to look at energy myths and also tips to help you better manage your costs. And then we'll open it out to a Q&A towards the end as well. Okay, so just to begin with, first and foremost, we do want to sort of focus on the news and its impact, what's going on in the world at the moment. I think everybody at this point has heard about the Israel-Iran conflict. That does impact what are known as commodity costs. So really, really early on, we want to assess sort of your bills as two key areas, your commodity costs and your non-commodity costs. Commodity costs are acts of war, geopolitical tensions around the world, what happens over in Asia or over in America, and how does that impact us here back in Europe or close to home back in the UK. The other area of the bill is non-commodity costs. So these are what is happening sort of on our doorsteps, the aging infrastructure of the grid, what is happening with bills, why are costs increasing, even if people are using less energy. So we will break down the bill into its two separate points. As NFU Energy, we work closely with a network of suppliers. We support members with good prices first and foremost, but we do a lot of work behind the scenes, liaising with the likes of Ofgem, with the likes of NESO, the National Energy Systems Operator, and we look at sort of market trends to help inform people on making the right decision for their business. What I will say to begin with, there are so many different types of bill still to this day in the market. Every situation is unique, so we'd really ask you that you open that up with questions at the end if there are any as well. Okay, so first thing we want to look at is whether you've got a fixed energy bill or a flexible contract. So for those with a fixed term contract, you would have likely either spoken to NFU Energy or gone to the supplier direct and taken out what was understood to be a fixed contract. Now, fixed contracts in themselves have historically never been reopened, as you're seeing with geopolitical tensions, with a requirement to update the grid. There are clauses in every single contract that do say that we can reopen the contract, or should we say the supplier can reopen the contract in the grave act of war, or if the government pass through another charge. And we are starting to see that happen increasingly on a more regular basis with suppliers. So we will look into that in a lot more detail. Some of the advantages is you do get largely predictable billing, you can budget a lot better, and you're largely shielded from a lot of price rises. On the other side, on the right-hand side, we'll have our flexible contracts. These are sort of historically used for larger users of energy. The prices move with the market conditions. So if we were looking at this a year and a half ago, the market has come down since where it was. So it would have been a good time to take out a flexible contract then. On a daily basis, the prices do fluctuate and traders would effectively look for the low point and purchase forward energy blocks at that time of day, which can actually help you benefit from a lower price throughout the duration of the contract. The downside is situations like what we've seen in the last week, war, geopolitical tensions, they can increase those prices overnight substantially. Then leaving people savings that they had made over a period of 6 months could be eaten up overnight. So those ones do really require careful market monitoring. Historically, they've been used by larger users of energy, but we are increasingly seeing smaller users look at those areas as well. Okay, so one of our key focuses on this webinar is understanding the energy bill. Firstly, why are they so confusing? So what I've done is I've done sort of a bit of a look into it, and I do want to share it and try and make it easy to understand. But aside from the wholesale cost of energy, which is basically buying your energy based on LNG or oil coming around the world, there are up to 15 non-commodity charges on bills. Now, many people receive their bill, they look at it, they see a final figure, but it's increasingly rare that people understand what every single line item is on a bill, and even rarer that they understand the ones that are going to be coming into in the future. So before the latest geopolitical events, basically non-commodity charges made up over 60% of the bill. So your wholesale price, the energy that you're purchasing, the actual electricity you're purchasing, is around about 33% of your bill in total currently. Um, Today, it's around about 67% of the bill is made up of these non-commodity charges. A lot of that is because the grid it is pretty old. It needs reform. I generally say when I speak to members, when have you ever seen a pylon taken down and been upgraded? And most of them have been there from the 40s, the 50s. The grid now, with the increase in solar coming onto the grid, the increase in wind coming onto the grid, there are days that the grid can't cope with what's actually coming in. Hence why you may have seen it in the news in months gone by, but there have been requests for generators not to generate energy and send it back to the grid. Generators have been paid not to send that energy to the grid. And you've also seen an increase in suppliers giving away energy free of charge. So you would have seen peak save campaigns, or you might have seen Octopus Energy or British Gas, for example, giving away energy free of charge on a Sunday morning or a Wednesday afternoon. It looks great and it looks like there's a lot of energy to give. It's largely because it's cheaper to give it away free of charge than it is to pay a generator to turn it off. So that's a little bit of a sort of overview on the grid, what's going on there at the moment. Increasingly on your bills, you're getting acronyms like TNUoS, which is transmission networks, EII, which is basically for your sort of super users in the UK to give them some alleviated costs, and CCL, climate change levy. These are appearing on bills more and more, but it is very rare that a bill will explain what those charges are. And we're here to sort of help you make sense of that and understand those bills in a little bit more clarity. So where I mentioned those 15 charges, you'll see that they're all broken down here. On the left-hand side, you'll see a lot of acronyms here. So we'll go into some of the key ones. So if we look at sort of TNUoS as our first one, TNUoS, I always explain it as your big pylons. If you're driving down the motorway and you see the major size pylons, those are TNUoS. They are the big pylons that take energy across the UK. They take it from region to region or from county to county. You can see there that they make up around about 5% of the bill. But of key importance here, those costs alone have risen up to 64% on where they were in 2025. Some of the biggest charges, you've got the renewable obligations, or the RO, that you may see on a bill. This is basically initially launched to help large-scale renewable electricity generation. So things like FIT contracts, FIT tariffs that were agreed sort of 15, 20 years ago. Some of the costs for paying came from those RO costs. You can see there again, it makes up 16.3% of the bill. And then you've got your DUOS as sort of your second biggest charge. Those are more, once you've come off the motorway, you're getting close to home, you're seeing those pylons or the local distribution hubs. They're generally a lot smaller, but again, that makes up 13.3% of the bill. And again, a lot of that is in need of upgrading. The more people that get solar, the less that those DUOS stations can actually cope with the energy and the demand that are going through them. And there are other charges that you may have seen or may have heard of. So you've got FIT, which is normally a pretty common one. So small scale renewables support. Many people that got solar installed 10, 15 years ago do get a kickback on the solar that they generate, whether they send it back to grid or not in some cases. And ultimately, every single bill covers a proportion of the bill to pay that cost. Some of the lesser known ones, nuclear RAB. So you'll see in situations, Sizewell C, which is a nuclear station. Historically, about 1.5% of your bill goes into that. It's gone up 10% from what it was last year. Largely reason for that is last year it was only that once the nuclear station had started generating nuclear energy that they could charge customers for it. Government came in last year and made some changes to the rules, and they announced that from when the spade goes into the ground, people can start charging for that. Now you can imagine to build a nuclear station is going to take the best part of 10 to 15 years. So it's an additional levy that's now being brought into the bills where historically you might have been away from that levy for probably the best part of 10 years. They're now making another nuclear station in Anglesey. And some of the information that we've seen behind the scenes would suggest that there's going to be up to 8 different nuclear stations coming into play by 2030. So I would say the nuclear RAB is definitely one that you will start to see on the bills more and more often. In some cases, depending on who your supplier is, you may have had a letter come through in the last sort of 3 to 6 months saying that you will see from February new charges added onto the bills. So again, historically, where people have taken out what they believe to be fixed contracts, suppliers are now reopening those contracts and levying these additional charges. Nuclear RAB especially has gone through sort of government approval. It's been passed through government to say that suppliers can pass those charges on. And as such, unfortunately, there's no comeback with suppliers on relieving those charges. Some of the lesser known ones, AAHEDC. So this is, you can see 0.2% of the bill, but there's a lot of talk going on at the moment with regards to how do we utilise regional energy as good as we can. How can we reduce the cost of electricity being distributed across the UK? So that's more of a research cost at the moment. It hasn't really had an impact on any customer as of yet. But again, it's one to look at sort of going forward. You'll definitely see more changes on the horizon with that. So that's a little bit about some of the key ones. In terms of looking at how those are spread out, I've just sort of done a little bit of a graph here that sort of shows where they're at, where they were at before the energy crisis back in 2020, 2021. You can see whilst non-commodity charges did make up a large amount of the bill, you can see how that's risen over the years. So there are customers that are using less energy than they were ever using before, but unfortunately they're seeing on the energy bill, the bottom line price is going up and up and up. And you will normally find that these are sort of largely built into the standing charges. So you can see here, these are all of the charges. This is where we're at today, sort of just gone into 2026. But you can see over the next sort of couple of years, there are expected to be really big jumps on a lot of those non-commodity charges as that grid has that reform carried out. In terms of customers on bills, you will definitely see the nuclear RAB added on as an additional line item. The EII support levy is also another one that was recently changed from 60% to 90% relief for sort of super users. And unfortunately, that cost has to be absorbed by other users in the UK. So you can see sort of back in 2021, it was hardly even a charge. You're just seeing it getting bigger and bigger as the years go by. It's the same with the nuclear RAB. It's just adding on a lot more to those non-commodity charges. Chnuas was the big one that we've seen this year. So you can see that there's a big jump on that, and then it should sort of flatten out and stabilize a bit. And then also Duos, this is your local distribution networks. You'll see that that will just continue. It always has been a pretty big cost in the bills, and it looks like it will just continue that way going forward as well. Okay, so we're sort of getting into a bill at the moment. Like I said, there's best part of 60 different energy suppliers out there. So every bill, we always say that we have to make it clear every bill will look slightly different, but you can always give myself or the team a call and we can always go through your bill in detail with you if need be. But there are some key things that we always say you need to be aware of on your bill to really understand it. First thing that we look at is the MPAN. So the MPAN is a unique identifier. There are, between business and domestic meters in the UK, there's about 53 million meters currently active in the UK. The MPAN is a unique identifier. We'll break it down in a little bit more detail on the next slide. But I would always say if you're ever going to speak to a supplier, to a broker, to ourselves, or you just want to sort of look at your online portal, your MPAN is going to be the unique identifier that will ascertain exactly what meter it's talking about. The rates. Second biggest area really is the rates. We've looked at sort of complaints that have gone into the Energy Ombudsman, and a large amount of contracts, the rates is the biggest area that is complained about. So I think last year there were 1,568 primary complaints to the Energy Ombudsman, and 88% of them centered around the rates on energy. So we would always say when you're looking at your bill, always have a look at the rates. And I would really be keen to stress this, look at them on every single bill. Because unfortunately, as suppliers change their billing systems, it's well known in the industry that there are issues on bills, there are issues on rates changing what looks like mid-contract. And unfortunately, sometimes people go and pay the bill and don't realize that the rates actually changed. Now, you can get backdated up to 6 years, but it's about identifying it first. And again, those are things that we can generally help with. VAT, sorry, I've just gone through a few slides there, but VAT. So again, it's a lesser known rule in business, but there's something known as the de minimis rule. So there are certain businesses, charities, care homes, churches, as key examples. They actually auto qualify for 5% VAT, but they do have to fill in a VAT declaration form. What's also lesser known is sort of farmhouses can qualify for split VAT. Now, some of the rules are on electricity. If you're using less than 1,000 units a month, even on a business contract, you will auto qualify for 5% VAT. If you're using more than 1,000 units a month, normally you would pay business VAT at 20%. Now, if that is part business, part residential, again, you can complete a VAT declaration form and you can actually pay 5% VAT on the domestic proportion of use. So in a farmhouse, that could be 80%, 85% of the bill. And then the remaining 10%, 15%, you would then pay at 20% VAT. So this is a lesser known rule for many, but it's something that I always think it's key to highlight. It's always worth looking at the VAT. Again, if you get an exemption on your VAT, you also then are also exempt from the CCL or the climate change levy, which is a government tax that was brought in alongside VAT as well. So those are probably the three key areas. If we look at the first key area there, the MPAN, understanding your MPAN is really sort of a key requirement, especially going forward. So you normally have what's known as a profile class. You will always hear our team say, have a look for an area on the bill where you've got a big S for Sierra and 2 rows of numbers. There have been some changes from previous bills, but the profile class would be here, the top left. That would largely tell a supplier, a broker, a third party. It would largely tell us what type of meter you have. So a 00 as an example, that would be a standard half-hourly meter. A 01 would be a domestic or historically a domestic meter, and a 03, just as an example, would be a single rate SME meter or small to medium enterprise. This middle section has probably had the single largest change in the last sort of year. Since September 2025, these were all changed. The middle set of numbers used to be a timer switch code, so it would tell us or it would tell your supplier what time of day that meter changes. So historically, you might have had economy 7 meters, off-peak meters. There would have been a timer switch built into that meter, and the code here was 3 digits previously, and it would have told us at what time of day that changed over. This has now been changed for something called a standard settlement configuration. And basically, it still gives us a switching time, but with the change that's going to come in on the grid in the future, it's now been amended to 4 digits. It gives you a bit of an idea that there are going to be a lot more tariffs coming out in the years to come. The GWAS ID used to previously be known as a line loss factor. This used to tell us how much energy was lost from the pylons to the premises. Now, with any sort of act of moving energy about, there's always an element of some energy is lost through transmission. That was actually changed, and it was actually moved over to sort of what's known as a GWAS ID. So when we talked about distribution earlier, the smaller pylons closer to home, it's basically now more defined, and it tells us how the electricity network running cost fees apply to individuals. So what you can find in some cases, the further away you are from the distribution station, the further the energy has to travel. The way the grid is moving going forward, that would actually be a more costly journey than somebody that was right next to a distribution hub. So you'll see the 3 digits long, but you will see a range of different numbers in there as well. If we head on to the bottom numbers, this bottom section here, that would be your MPAN. So you'll always have two starting numbers. So 17, I believe off the top of my head, is up in Scotland, but there are about 25 different codes that can start with. So 10, as an example, would be in London, 14 would be in Birmingham, 17 would be up in Scotland, but you get different ranges across the UK. So the first two digits tell us exactly who your distributor is, whether that's National Grid, whether it's Scottish Power Networks, whether it's ONG, who have just taken over one of the DNOs. But that would actually give an immediate update as to what area of the UK you're located in. The 8 digits here in the middle, known as core digits, those are just a mix of random numbers, but they're unique to every single meter in the UK. And then the last 3 digits just does a validation piece on those. So as 12 as 11 numbers altogether, that would be the unique area, and that would just tell us what area of the country that you're in. You will generally hear suppliers ask you, can I get your MPAN number to quote you? It's a necessary thing. We need to know what area of the UK you're in, because every area of the UK has a different price book, and it needs to be unique to your meter type. So not giving the MPAN number to somebody that wants to quote means that they can only give you a guide price. So yeah, so that's a little bit about sort of your top line. There is something called MHHS, or meter half hourly settlement, coming in going forward, where this will be used more and more, but we're going to come on to that in just a couple of slides anyway. What I've done here is I've just used a British Gas template bill. The reason for that is they are still sort of the largest supplier in the UK in terms of the business world anyway. I know they were recently taken over on the domestic side by Octopus. But yeah, I've used that as a template. Most bills will have a similar template attached to them. But as I said at the very beginning, there's about 70 different suppliers out there, and there are always niches. You might find different things in different areas. So some key things to be aware of. First and foremost, the account number. Account number will be vital for online portals, because increasingly suppliers want to push you online. They want you to be able to check your account yourself when you need to. You will always have a specific account number, and it will nearly always be affiliated with your login or when you first log into that online portal. If you're raising issues, raising concerns with a supplier, they will nearly always ask you for the account number if you're dealing with them direct. If you're dealing with a third party, they would nearly always ask you for the MPAN number, which we've just covered. Your site address, I've just put in there. I think it's pretty important. It's often overlooked as a part of the bill. Now, the site address can often differ to what you understand the address to be. So in this case, you would have the address that the bill was sent to, which in this scenario does match 100%. Now, the site addresses do go back up to 50 years, back to when the grid was first formed in many cases. And you can still see those appearing as plot numbers. You can see them as previous business names. You can see them as just basically completely missing half the information. You can see them with half a postcode. Now, when you're giving the information over to a supplier or over to a third party, it is actually quite important you give the site address as it appears, because with you alongside your MPAN, there's a national database. And if it doesn't match what's on the database 100%, it can be rejected by the suppliers, thus causing a requirement to resell the product or a requirement to go through the whole process again. The third part that I want to look at is the contract end date. So the contract end date should be displayed on every single bill. We do hear from some suppliers that they don't feel it's a requirement, but it was actually made law that had to be provided on every single bill. Any non-providing of an end date on a bill could actually lead to a complaint where you would actually be able to leave the contract early. But this section is the date from which you can actually change supplier. So you can see there you've cancelled your fixed price energy contract and can switch supplier after this date ends on. That date could be sort of December 2026, for example. Now, one of the lesser known things is people normally wait for the renewal letter to come through. In situations like where we're at today, the energy market is expected to rise over the coming weeks. People can actually start looking at energy contracts up to 18 months before the current contract comes to an end. Now, the rates that you're on currently would still continue through to the end date, but you can actually take advantage of a falling market and renew really early. You can preempt and look at what's going to happen in the weeks and months ahead and make a decision based on sort of your appetite for risk there as well. So we always say there, historically, a lot of people have known it to be 3 or 4 months. You can actually look up to 18 months. The sweet spot is normally 6 months, and I'll give you a reason for that. the market, once you start looking 18 months out, the market will always include risk in any prices that they give to you. At 12 months, the market can largely forecast where they would expect prices to be with a reasonable degree of intelligence. At 6 months, it's really, really accurate because they can see the trends. They've probably already hedged and bought the energy up front. At 3 months, they've probably already sold most of the energy for that period. And yes, they would still give you a competitive price, but the closer you get to your renewal date, the harder it is to actually get real competition between the suppliers, because in most cases you'll be left to sort of either renew with your current supplier or basically you run for a full tender, which the suppliers are already aware will take a week or so. So contract end date, being aware of that on every bill is key, and looking at that alongside what's happening with the current markets or the future markets. We always say reach out, give us a call nice and early if you do want to discuss it, or even if you just wanted a feel for what the market's doing. Onto sort of the second page of the bill. So what I've done is I've taken out a load of this sort of terms and conditions, because terms and conditions with every supplier are unique and different. So some other areas to be aware of: your MPAN. Within the bill itself, you can see here, you can see the older style where it only had 3 digits at the top, but that would be your MPAN. So again, online portals, raising issues with your supplier, it is a key requirement. Unit charges and reads. So I've done 2 different examples here. You can see that this meter is a day, evening and weekend charge. So you'll be able to see there, it's a key part of the bill. You'll have your unit rate there. So that will be the unit rate for the day units. And then that will be the unit rate for the evening and weekend units. So you can see 13.73. You can tell this is a sample billing, probably really, really old. And it is 16.53 on the day units as well. So reads can often be incorrect there. It's well known across the industry, between 5 and 10% of all UK bills are deemed to be incorrect. So hence why I sort of gave that point earlier. It's really, really important that you do check every single bill that comes through. There have been some major changes at suppliers over the years. Probably nearly all of us have heard of Octopus Energy at this point. Their billing system is known as Kraken. That has been purchased by a number of suppliers who are now using their billing system in the background. Now, modifying a billing system from a supplier that carries over 2 million customers in some case comes with a lot of teething issues. And you have seen people have been thrown onto out of contract rates without even noticing. And this is why we say, importantly, at the moment, it's really important that you do check every single bill. Again, if it does happen, if it does go wrong, we can always raise that with you. You can go to the supplier direct, but it's really important that you notice it early, because before you know it, the money's come out of the bank. We know with a lot of the suppliers, it's easy to take the money; it's harder to get it back. Right. Standing charges is the last one. So many non-commodity charges that we talked about earlier, those 15 different charges, would largely be factored into the standing charge. Now you can see this one about a year ago, 27.95 pence a unit. Standing charges now, it's not surprising to see standing charges of £3 and £4 a day. But also on a half-hourly meter or a flex meter, you might see standing charges of £50 or £60 a day. So there's a massive fluctuation on what you can see in that area. But again, it's about checking that alongside your end date and ensuring that you're being billed correctly all the way through the contract. Okay, you can see that that bill's only billed at 5% VAT, and that's largely because of what I said earlier. It's using less than 1,000 units in total. So at 448 for the day, 437 for the night, circa 900 units for that bill. Because it's under 1,000, it'll be charged at 5%. If that had been 1,400 units, you would have seen that VAT at 20% VAT. And these are some of the areas that we would look at for yourself and sort of help you out with. Other key bits to look at: this one has been based on an actual meter read. So you'll normally see there that little section where it says read. That would suggest that it's been read by the customer. The customer has provided that reading. In some cases, you will just see an E, or it will say estimate in there. And that's normally where the customer hasn't provided a meter read, or the customer hasn't got a smart meter in there as well. Okay. So what I've done is I've just done a side-by-side check just for those that might have what's known as a half-hourly meter. So if we I'm going to flip back and forth for just a while, but you can see there's only 2 charges. And as we move over to a half hourly meter, you can see that there are a number of different charges. This one specifically has 4, but the difference is with half hourly meters, you will have different billing periods. So again, this is a really, really old bill, but it would have had winter, it would have had winter off peak, it would have had summer daytime, it would have then had a generic unit rate, it would have had a night rate and an evening and weekend rate. You can see very quickly how the bills differ. And with some customers, they have both half hourly and non-half hourly meters, and it can become very confusing. With this one, you can see there's a different rate for practically every area. So with these ones, it looks like the suppliers billed the customer the same on those 3 areas, but it's not uncommon to see 5 or 6 different prices for each different area. So I would say for those that have got a half hourly meter, it's really important that you do get a smart meter installed where that data can travel back accurately. But if you haven't, again, it's about understanding there are different lines on the bill and different parts of the day will be charged at different prices. There was some work done a couple of years ago with regards to moving nearly all of these onto just a flat day and night. But as we come on to what's happening in the future, you'll see that what happened back in 2020 is actually gone full circle, and it will likely be reintroduced again in a slightly different way. You use it, unit charges and reads, again, notable difference in the amount of lines there, which we've just covered, and then your standing charges as well. So you can see here the standing charge for that one. You get what's known as a capacity charge, which wasn't on the other bill. So the capacity charge is basically almost like a rental agreement for having the energy available to come to your premises. But you can see there the standing charge, and even if we look at this back in 2020, the standing charge was nearly 3 times the amount because it's on a half hourly meter as opposed to a non-half hourly. So you will see some big differences. Again, if you look at the usage, it's over 1,000 units on this one. So you can see the VAT is charged at 20% there. So it just gives you a bit of an idea on what you can see as the differences from bill to bill. Changes on the horizon. So I'll come on to sort of that one in a lot more detail now. There are a lot of changes coming in. So first one that we want to talk about is a metered half hourly settlement, or MHHS. This is already underway. They do say that it should be completed by October 2026. The likelihood is some suppliers are already going out to late 2027. This is the process of changing every meter in the UK to a smart meter. Now, there are reasons why people don't want smart meters, but I would say as part of the sort of the UK's wider pitch and why bills are so complex at the moment is the way that meters have been set up. If a customer doesn't give an actual meter read, it's billed on an estimate. It's normally 2 or 3 times the amount of work then to get that corrected. Also with billing cycles, every supplier has a slightly different billing cycle day. So whilst the customer may pay on the last day of the month or the first day of the month, some suppliers end that billing cycle on the 5th of the month, or the suppliers might do it on the 15th. So there's no unity across the supplier world at the moment, and it can just become really, really confusing, especially when customers change partway through the month. So MHHS will be looking at amending that. Every meter will then send accurate data every 30 minutes back to the grid. The overriding aim of this is to then say to the market, this is how much energy the country actually needs to purchase, as opposed to putting in risk and appetite. Customers use this much at this day, they use this much at this other time. So MHHS is expected to sort of relieve a lot of those problems. P442 modification, some people may have heard of it as sleeving or peer-to-peer trading. This is a modification that came in 2025, I believe. And what it was is there were people that have energy available, and this is sort of where the grid's going. It was brought in sort of discussed in May 24, amended in April 25. But this is where people were able to sort of generate energy and sell it back to the grid. What they were doing is they were selling it back either through a SEG agreement or an export agreement. Now, what happens behind the scenes, there are a lot of modification checks and a lot of people look into the market and say, we can make this better. P442 was a success there. And what they've done is they went back and they said, if we can sell this energy back between 12 and 3 in the day, and you can find a buyer between 12 and 3 in the day, then surely we shouldn't have to pay the full impact of the standing charge. There should be some relaxation on some of those charges. That was agreed by Ofgem in April 2025, and it gives exemptions on what are known as CFD charges, or contracts for difference, capacity market charges. So it normally removes around about 25% of the standing charge. So what happens is the buyer of that bespoke energy actually pays around about 25% less on all their standing charges. And the seller of the energy also gets a kickback because they've sold it back to the grid at a time it's going to be used. And then this sort of overcomes some of the problems I talked about earlier, where suppliers are giving energy away free of charge because there's too much energy on the grid, or paying generators to turn the generation off. The other one, change on the horizon, it's already in there, but it's probably a lesser known about one. Non-final demand. So basically, non-final demand is you could have a battery on site, you could have a generator on site. There are loads of different technologies out there already, solar included as well. But if you've got any of those types of businesses on site, or sorry, types of meters on site, you can, if you're exporting 100% of that energy back to grid, you can actually claim exemptions on your CHNUOS and your DUOS charges, which when we look back at the start, they were two of the three biggest charges on the bill. Again, you can claim exemptions on those. Now, currently, the current rules will stipulate it's only if you're selling 100% of that energy back to grid. So you'd be looking at currently something like a wind turbine generation system. There is a consultation which we're actually part of at the moment with regards to looking at that and saying, if the farmer lives on the farm and he's using 3% of that energy or 5% of that energy, he's still exporting a massive amount back to grid. But we think it's only fair that they still get that exemption on 90% of the energy, 97% of the energy. The 3% they're using, yes, they should pay all the charges on that. But the current rules would stipulate at 97%, you don't get any exemptions whatsoever. So we are currently going through a sort of a consultation with regards to looking at amending that, similar to what happened with P442. Nuclear RAB, we've spoken about that already, but as I said, by 2030, the expectation is there will be another 8 nuclear plants announced throughout the UK. This will likely see that third-party line increase in the years ahead. So in terms of looking at what some of the suppliers are doing now, some suppliers are doing fixed contracts with a clause that says we can reopen. Other suppliers are going one step further. They're building in a risk appetite and they're saying, regardless of what happens, we will never reopen the contract. Now, again, when you look at what's happening in the future of energy, understanding those bills is really, really key, in that if you're going to be using more and more energy in the years ahead, or you're planning to use more energy in the years ahead, my advice there, and most of the market's advice, would be you look at something that is fully locked in, that isn't going to be reopened, because all the things I've shown you so far would suggest that the market's only going to go one way in the years to come. Contractual clauses and pass-throughs. So again, we've touched on it a little bit. All suppliers at the moment have a clause in the contract that says we can reopen the contracts in acts of war if the government pass on new levies, new charges. But increasingly, there are things that people are not always aware of. So if you're looking at installing solar, you're looking at installing wind, your consumption would largely fall on where it was before. I would always advise, a part of understanding your bill is also understanding if there's any volume tolerance on that bill. So some suppliers would give you a threshold of 10%. Other suppliers will say it doesn't matter what you use. Now, if you were using 20,000 units and then you got solar installed and your consumption dropped to 10,000 units, you could actually risk receiving a charge from the supplier saying you're no longer using the energy that we purchased for you. So volume tolerance is definitely a lesser known contractual clause that exists with a lot of suppliers. It's about just checking your bill, because every supplier will have a different clause. If you're speaking to a broker, you're speaking to a supplier, you're looking at renewing a contract, always ask them about removing the volume tolerance, because what it does is it just gives you that assurance that if things do change on site, you're not going to be opening up yourself to another charge at the end, or a potential fee. And then probably 2 more that I sort of just wanted to have a look through. So Clean Power 2030 and Net Zero 2050. So there is a big drive from the grid. I think we've probably all heard of Net Zero, which is aimed by 2050 that we're using solely clean energy. But the shorter term one is Clean Power 2030. Now, as part of sort of this webinar, naturally doing a bit of research there, I was really interested to see that the National Energy Systems Operator themselves said that the goal of doing that is feasible, but pushes the limits of what is actually deliverable. In short, they're saying unless the world changes very, very quickly, it's not going to happen. And sort of in terms of the rule book, the UK needs to actually build twice as much transmission network in the next 5 years as it's done in the last decade. Now, I think from everything that we've looked at, if you've seen how the prices are going up at the moment, it's highly inconceivable that they'll be able to do that in 5 years, what they haven't done in the last 10. So what you're going to find is basically with sort of clean power, suppliers are now starting to increase, giving away sort of green energy contracts, looking at what have we already got on our systems, how can we sort of make this a bit of a marketing masterpiece and sort of give people something that looks like it's for nothing. So these are some of the changes that you'll see on the horizon. You will start to see in the years to come, green energy contracts will probably be a standard part of your energy contract at the moment, where historically they've come at a very small uplift. So yeah, last one really is time of use tariffs. Time of use tariffs is a big area that is definitely going to be coming into play. We're saying from sort of 2027 up to 2032. So it seems like years and years away, but I think in terms of understanding your energy bill, getting to grips with where the world's going to go, a time of use tariff will actually stipulate you actually pay the energy based on what's on grid. So for a dairy farmer, as an example, if he or she is up at 4 a.m. in the morning using energy, 90% of the UK is still asleep. There's a lot of energy available on the grid. For that half-hourly interval, up until probably 6:30, 7 o'clock, where more of the UK start to wake, the energy price at that time of day would be a lot cheaper. At 7 a.m., when 90% of the UK start to wake up, energy usage across the UK is going to surge. That will be known as a red zone. The energy price for that half an hour and a half potentially would actually then become more expensive. It'll be the same between 12 and 3. Between 12 and 3, a lot of solar is being generated into grid. The energy market price at that time of day would be expected to be quite cheap because there's a lot of energy available. 7 p.m, half time during a World Cup final, for example, everybody's going to go and turn the kettle on, energy is going to surge. Again, it will be a red zone, energy price will be really expensive at that time of day. So this is one of the aims for getting smart meters installed now, to be able to sort of build that method of billing in the future. So those are time of use tariffs. A lot of people haven't heard much about them. It's similar to how half-hourly meters used to work when they had different rates for the spring, summer, autumn, and winter. So that's where I said earlier, it's coming full circle. The energy market's actually returning to a place where it used to be. This was actually done successfully in Holland about 10 years ago, and they were able to equalise the grid. So what happened is people bought basically timer switches. They were putting on their washing between 12 and 3 in the afternoon or at 3 o'clock in the morning when the unit price was probably 7 or 8 pence, as opposed to doing it when they had come back from work where the unit price was 15 or 16 pence. So that's the grid's ambition, to equalise the grid, to not have these big areas where there's lots of energy available and areas where there's really a requirement for more energy to go in. So that's a little bit about changes on the horizon. I know it's a lot of information, a lot to take in, but it gives you an understanding of why those bills are so complex and how much is coming in on the future. So what I've also done is I've just put in a few energy myths in there as well, because there are a few sort of questions, age-old questions, where people look at it and say, is this real? Is it not real? I always think in terms of your energy bills, understanding sometimes why the bill's so high and you're not necessarily using the energy. So we've looked at the first one. If it's not plugged in, it's not using any energy. In terms of that, it can be correct in some cases, but we always would suggest, if it's an iPhone charger as an example, if you fill the charger and it's warm, that charger is using energy, and as such, it's adding to your energy bill. So we would always say we're a fan of turning it off if you're not using it. But if you do want to double check it and it's hard to get to or it's hard to turn off, just fill the plug and fill if it's warm. If it is warm, then it's definitely using energy. Second myth that we wanted to look at is solar only being useful in the summer. I would definitely say that's a very strong myth. Solar is actually better when it's not too hot. When it's boiling hot, solar doesn't actually cope very, very well. It doesn't take in as much of the UV as it would otherwise do on a slightly nice day. I'm looking out my window at the moment and there's not a cloud in the sky. But yeah, on a day like today, the solar will actually pick up a lot of UV. When it's actually too hot or in the middle of summer, solar is actually well known to be less beneficial or less efficient, should I say. So yeah, so solar, we would definitely say, even on a cloudy day, solar will still be taking energy in. It's cheaper to keep the heating on the low setting permanently. Um, that seemed to be from sort of research that seemed to be an age-old one where it was actually more expensive to actually send a surge of energy back. With the way that the boilers are now, with the way central heating systems are, or even older style systems, it's actually better to turn it off when you're not using it and turn it back on when you need it. One of the other energy myths, energy contracts or green contracts especially, are more expensive. This one was a bit of a 50-50. So some suppliers are already giving away green contracts. There are other suppliers, if it needs to be 100% from renewable sources, there can still be an uplift. That uplift has fallen massively from what in years gone by was about 3p a unit uplift. We're now seeing most of those uplifts at around about 0.2 of a penny to 0.4 of a penny. But we do have some exclusive agreements with suppliers as well. So if we've got any dairy farmers on the call, for example, if your buyer actually requires green energy, we do have a bespoke contract for that type of purpose as well. And like I said, you'll find with net zero 2050, that will become more and more commonplace in the years ahead. Big businesses or big buyers are going to also need to prove that their route is green, and they're much more likely in the years ahead to ask you for green contracts. So yeah, I just thought that myth would be a really important one in there. And the last one, I think we've already covered it slightly, but the bill is the bill. It's been a big area. We always say double check the bill because it's well known in the industry 5 to 10% of bills are actually incorrect. Never just look at the bill and assume it's correct. If you doubt it, raise it with somebody that can definitely help. You can give us a call, or we can always say go to the supplier direct. They should actually be able to help. But generally speaking, we know what we're looking for on those areas. So those are just some of the energy myths I wanted to cover. Last slide from me before we open up for a Q&A, but tips on better managing the bills going forward. Provide regular meter reads. If you haven't already got a smart meter, I can't stress enough, provide meter reads to your supplier on a regular basis. Get a smart meter installed. Now, I know it's not everybody's cup of tea, but like I said, with time of use tariffs, if you don't have a smart meter, you won't actually be able to take a time of use tariff and get the advantages. Currently, there are some suppliers already giving away to business customers free energy at certain times of the day if they have a smart meter installed. So again, every choice is your own, but one of the recommendations to sort of help with bills in the future would be to get one installed. Review the contract in plenty of time. Don't leave it until the last minute because you're at the mercy of the energy market and what it's actually doing. Always review it in plenty of time. Be aware of sneaky clauses like volume tolerance or pass-throughs. I know we've spoken about those already, but just really be aware of what you're taking out, especially if you've never worked with the person that's setting up your contract before. Seek advice from NFU Energy if you want us to sort of have a look at something you've offered. We can definitely help with those areas. And I think the last one, be aware of key calendar dates. So April every single year is when the grid announce a lot of their major changes. They would actually uplift contract prices or build in new government levies, and that nearly always happens in April. So as you get closer to that date, be mindful that the risk and the appetite can actually be put into prices as well. So those are just some of the tips there. And I think I'll just put a final slide in there, sort of from ourselves. We've got about 19,500 NFU members that have contracts through the energy team. Our buying group, so at the moment we have a buying group where it's renewable energy free of charge as standard, £100 voucher as well after the first bill. But in the last sort of 18 months, we've given away about £75,000 worth of vouchers to customers. We work with 37 different suppliers, and that covers water, electric and gas, as well as the likes of National Grid. The CCL scheme, which we actually administer on behalf of the NFU, since 2013, we've saved customers approximately £30 million. Advice, we give advice on nearly every call today, but generally speaking, if customer doesn't know what they want, about 85% of our calls will actually be quite lengthy in that we're giving people the right advice and sort of really helping them understand the bills. And then last one sort of there is basically our NFU Energy team recovered over £300,000 alone for customers last year due to billing faults, third-party charges, and also the incorrect banding of meters by suppliers. So I've just wanted to put some numbers there just to sort of show that it does actually happen. We look at this all day, every day, and there are a large number of customers that can actually make a saving just by really understanding that bill. So we've got sort of telephone numbers. I'll share the slides here, and I do want to open it up for Q&A as well. I'm aware that I've gone over slightly. But yeah, competitive rates from trusted suppliers, support when things go wrong, and especially at times like this, it's about clarity around what's happening on the market and advice on the industry as well. So so you've got contact details there. I'll share these slides over, or we'll get them to be distributed to the attendees. But I suppose I'll open it up for any questions now, if anyone does have any. Yeah, David?
Yeah, the time of use meters coming into play. Is it going to be worthwhile to install batteries to take advantage of that electric in the future?
Yes and no. So batteries, I suppose the batteries have a lifespan, and what we've always looked at, if you're going to be generating the energy to sell it back at a peak time, then the answer to that would be yes. But I think you also have to weigh that up against what is everybody else going to do, and what does that then mean for that, what would have been a peak time in years gone by? Will it still be a peak time in the future?
It was for own use. It was for own use, actually.
Okay, so if it's for self-use, then I would definitely say yes, your peaky periods then is when you would actually utilize the energy from the battery and not have to pay it at the peak price.
Yeah, because the battery design and everything, and they're getting cheaper all the time. It's going to be a totally different game in a few years, isn't it?
Yeah. So we would say this should be coming in from as early as 2027, but you would expect with all the smart metering issues that they're encountering at the moment, 2030 is more realistic. By then, in the same way we've seen with solar prices come down massively, you would expect batteries to be more efficient than they are today in a couple of years. And you would also expect the cost to continue to come down as well.
Thank you.
No worries. I think I've got one in the Q&A. I'll just have a quick look. Where can I get advice about extortionate standing charges on a grain store heater? £900 a month. So on that, I think we can definitely give advice on that. The first thing we would have to do is look at the capacity of your meter. Now, one thing I'd just give you, if you just type into Google DCP 412, we've actually just finished a 2-year consultation with DeCusa, which is basically the people that make those changes or suggest changes behind the scenes, looking at exactly this scenario. So I'm well aware of this in detail, but you'll probably be using your energy a couple of months of the year, but you're paying a standing charge all year round. We've actually already looked at sort of an exemption rule. It still needs to be approved through Ofgem, and unfortunately it's sat with them since August last year. But there is some work being done with regards to what we would deem in the industry as peaky users. But yeah, I think in short, if you just type in DCP 412 online, but alternatively give us a call, ask for myself, and I can go through that in a lot of detail. I think we would want to look at what your capacity is and whether we can reduce your capacity, and as such, reduce the banding and reduce that charge for you. Andrew, let me just unmute. Yep, so Andrew might be on mute at the moment. Andrew, I think your mic's still on mute. Guy, if we move on to yourself.
Yeah, sorry, that's me right. When you state that there's times when the electricity will be cheaper, such as 12 to 3, will that only be the wholesale price, or will that impact on the non-commodity charges also?
So that would actually impact on the unit price. So the overall unit price would be impacted. In terms of your non-commodities, they largely go into your standing charges. But there are some suppliers that don't like to give you £3 a day, £4 a day. So this is where we say it's more and more important going forward in knowing what suppliers are doing what when it comes up for renewal, because every supplier has a different billing mechanism and different billing method. So if I was to give you an example today, E.ON, for example, still continue to give a really low standing charge because they build the non-commodity into the unit rate. If your contract was with E.ON, you would benefit massively from a time of use tariff. But in 3 years' time, E.ON may not be doing that, and they could have changed how they do things. So we would always say, as it's coming up for renewal, we can give you the best advice on that at the time.
Yeah, okay, good. Thank you.
Okay, no worries. Andrew, I don't know if you got your mic. Okay, so I can't see any other questions at the moment. Okay.
Hi, Joshua. Hi.
Hello.
Hi there. It's Guy.
Okay.
We've got a very small farm just north of York, and we run some holiday cottages from the farm, which are only sort of 6 years old. We had a new installation put in for the power for it at the time, and a half-hour meter was fitted. But with obviously the standing charges on half-hour meters increasing all the time, would you advise me to try and get? I believe that we don't use enough electric really to warrant being on a half-hour meter. Would you advise me moving away from that and trying to get a different type of metering system put in?
I think the advice would be yes. The difficulty in doing it would be immense. Unfortunately, if it's using less than 69 kVA, you could make a strong case with regards to saying historically it never was a half-hourly meter.
No, so we use about 46, 47,000.
Okay. Is that across the 4?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So what you'll be looking at is the actual capacity of the meter as opposed to the energy usage that you're pulling through that. So as a half-hourly meter, the meter should have either a kVA or a capacity assigned to it.
Yeah.
If that's above 69, that will be the reason you've had half-hourly. We will probably have to do some work on your half-hourly data to see if you can actually bring that to below 69 kVA. If the answer to that is yes, then you can actually make a case to get it changed from a half-hourly to a non-half-hourly, albeit it is very difficult to do. But if it's 100 kVA, 200 kVA, and that's where you're maxing out, there wouldn't be much that you could do about that, unfortunately. Apart from saying it's 100% domestic use, and for that reason you want it moved over to a domestic style tariff.
I see. Right. Okay. Thank you.
No worries. So yeah, so I'm conscious of time. We're dead on 12, but I'll still leave it open for questions if there are any questions for another minute. If not, I'd like to say thank you very much for attending. What I'll do is I'll ensure sort of Jenny can get these slides out to attendees. But again, I think our contact details they're on the slide there. Take them down if you haven't already, and just reach out to myself or the team. I will say if that is going to be today or tomorrow, it's a little bit manic at the moment, but definitely reach out to us. We will still answer and get through to you. Alternatively, you could always leave a message with call first, and they'll pass it on to us for us to call you back as well.